Professor Fenwick Melvey is an internet researcher and associate professor of communication studies at Concordia University, and he joins us today. So tell me, is the media broken?
Well, I think that's a deep question, and I think it reveals a lot of anxieties that we have today. People rely on the news, they rely on the news to be informed, and yet at the same time, what counts as the source of the news, whether it's social media or TV broadcasting, the radio or public broadcasting, people have a lot of different sources of information they're coming from, and the diversity and sometimes the fact that you're getting mixed messages can really undermine people's confidence in all the news they're receiving.
When we move to social media and we see Facebook and Twitter and Google shutting down Donald Trump's accounts permanently.
This is, I think, what gets into why there's such anxiety is that right now what we've seen is that as traditional broadcasters change and media habits differ, people move from, say, watching the nightly news to watching the news online. And they get that news often through using social media, and they have a wider array of choices. And sometimes they can start selecting more news that, is closer to the partisan bias. What we're really seeing is that Facebook and YouTube and Google and Twitter to a lesser degree are really influential because all of a sudden they have control over who has access to the large audiences using their platforms. And that raises these really deep questions that we have no answer to about what's a responsible way of making sure that they're ensuring that people aren't abusing their platforms or using it to spread hate or harmful information or using it to fraud and trick people. And those are the part of the anxieties we have about whether we have enough trust in the media.
Yeah, and now we're seeing a ban on the far-right platform Parler. What does that mean in your eyes when it comes to democracy and the freedom of speech when you have a group being silenced that way?
What we've seen on the attack on Capitol Hill, I think a lot of people took it as a surprise, but for those studying, far-right communities on the internet, there's been growing concern about certain extremists turning to be more violent and using social media platforms to organize what we see as violent rallies. And so I think what we're now trying to do is actually catch up to, I think, 4 to 5 years of complete ignorance about how do you address that issue. And in some ways, what we're seeing is this reaction where if we just shut down the platforms, if we take Parler offline, we're going to be able to fix this problem. And I think the challenge is that this is a deep, long-term trend where people are really committed and have come to have deep-seated beliefs that would cause them to attack the Capitol Hill. And what we're trying to do is address that through fixing, these access to media questions. So I am sometimes worried that's not the right answer to the problems that we have.
Let's look at conventional media. Will we ever trust it fully ever again?
I think that one thing to say is that we need to be specific about the concerns here. And we don't see in the research the same degree of concern about the far left as we do about the far right. And so I think what we're talking about specifically here is far right extremism online. And that's something we see of growing influence. And I think that a lot of what has come about is that these communities, you see it through a number of different conspiracy groups, are very adept at dismantling and building counterfactual, evidence and truths and realities. And I think it's going to be really hard to build back public trust in any media system, especially, the idea that it could be one reality that we all agree on. And I think this is a real challenge of how do you go forward, ensuring that those people that have become really distrustful of the news and really believing in more and more extreme conspiracy, how do you actually bring them back in and bring them into the fold of, I think, what is kind of liberal democratic politics?